Welcome to Story Chats at Inspy Romance. I'm Elizabeth Madry, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Narelle Atkins.
I'm Valerie Comer.
So today we're going to talk about incorporating alcohol in CCR. So it's kind of a tricky topic, but also one I think that is worth talking about. And I managed to browbeat Narelle and Valerie into doing an episode on it. Because I think we live in the world. And so it is an issue that comes up. So it's worth talking about. And I think this is another episode where I think I can say that there isn't a definitive right or wrong answer here. You're going to get 6 opinions from the 3 of us,
And the cat.
And
That's a teetotaler, by the way.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, you don't know.
You might have gotten in somebody's glass. No, I don't think
I've actually caught Miss Daisy with her tongue in the dregs of a glass of white wine, and she got drunk, and she's on her cat tree. And we learned that never to leave anything like that anywhere near her, because I have seen her drunk, and it's not good. It is not good.
Learn from Daisy's mistakes.
That's right.
Yes.
So
yes,
just like the decision to drink in your own life is something that you need to be guided by the Holy Spirit. I think your decision to read books or authors whose characters have any sort of relationship with alcohol needs to be made the same way. And as authors, our decision to include it or not include it is something that we are hopefully prayerfully approaching. That's my caveat, my disclaimer.
Probably been thought about, not accidentally inserted.
Yeah. So back in the day, the 80s and 90s, alcohol in CCR was this huge no-no, maybe even into the early 2000s, I think, because it was still...
Probably still is in Love Inspired.
Yes, and absolutely there. Love Inspired is exactly the place to look at that. They tend to be on the more conservative end just to make sure that they don't offend someone.
In every area. Yeah.
And that was the overall overarching thing with Christian publishing at all, into probably the early 2000s. Better to avoid it than to be a problem. Yes. And then that has changed. Why do you think that has changed? Do you have any thoughts on that, Narelle?
I definitely think it relates to culture. I wrote a blog post at Inspy Romance. I think it was the beginning of 2022.
About a year and a half ago. Yeah, I looked it up.
Yeah, on alcohol and CCR. So personally, I wouldn't put alcohol in a book as an author with someone who's regularly drinking, and there's a whole bunch of reasons as to why. But that's a personal thing, and I don't put what I personally think onto other authors.
Sure.
But there are readers who will get very upset if they see alcohol in a book. And so it's such a tricky topic. I think in Australia, people don't bat an eye at someone drinking a glass of wine in a Christian romance or having a beer at the footy. I mean, we live in such an alcohol-saturated culture, particularly the connection between sport and alcohol is very strong. And we also have a lot of European migration that happened in the 70s and 80s, and that brings across wine as being a cultural part of having dinner. So you have dessert and then you have a glass of wine that matches the food you're eating and all that kind of thing. So we have that sort of alcohol embedded in our culture in a way that's not necessarily destructive or a problem. Whereas I looked at what was going on in America, I watched the movie Footloose. I thought that was a hilarious joke until I realized that that's actually what life was like in certain parts of the States.
Certain parts.
Certain parts, not everywhere, but I could not relate to that movie, the no drinking, the no dancing. I mean, we have 18 is the age to drink alcohol in Australia. Back, if you go from the 90s backwards, younger people could walk into a pub and probably weren't going to get picked up for being underage. Now it's a different ballgame with ID being, the licensing laws are very strict. Things are very different now, but back in the day it was a lot more relaxed. So I think Australians have probably viewed American books as being more conservative because culturally we're slightly different. So I think that makes a difference. But maybe as time's moved on, American culture has become more like Australian culture, which may be good or it may be bad.
Valerie?
I agree that the change we see in fiction is mimicking a few years behind, but mimicking what's happening in society. And you mentioned dancing as well. The drinking and dancing was, I mean, yeah, both like very forbidden in my childhood because I'm so old, and also because of the Mennonite subculture.
Yeah.
And it was like two things that just really went together, right? And going to movies, like all of that. Yeah. 3 corporal horrible sins that you might commit, but you commit them knowingly, right? So because many Christians now do enjoy occasional moderate drinks, a lot of times even the major publishers have relaxed their thoughts on that a little bit. And then of course we are independent authors and we can in fact put anything we want in our books. We can only do it so many times, and with, you know, with whatever grace or whatever, if we want readers to buy, we have to pay attention to what readers want to read. But nobody's stopping us from having whatever, however much drinking. If we want the characters drinking in every chapter, we can do it. The readers may not appreciate it. We might get 1-star reviews, we might get boycotted, whatever, but we're allowed, we can do it if we want to. So, and the other thing too, divorced characters was another thing that was just like really absolutely did not happen in contemporary Christian romance like 15-20 years ago. Just didn't happen. It was okay. Yeah, I'm not even going. Never mind.
We can do a whole episode on divorce if we need to do that.
That's not where I was going.
Okay.
But anyway.
So I tend to agree. I think the American church in general has become more accepting of casual alcohol drinking. And that, so that then as that permeates the Christian culture, where it used to be the American culture was fed by this idea of Christian values, that has been broken away from in the 80s, late 80s and 90s, you know, and through. And so now I would say our culture is much less influenced by Christian values. And in fact, Christian values are starting to be influenced by the secular culture. And so, you know, we used to have, and there are still some towns, you mentioned Footloose, small Southern towns that totally, like when my husband was stationed in Georgia in the mid-90s, we were not in a dry county, but there was a dry county right next door, you know, and they still had laws, like there were no alcohol sales on Sundays, that sort of thing. Or, but I imagine that those are going away. Today, I haven't been back, but in the last 20 years, I'm sure that has changed. And so, you know, social drinking.
I'd like to point out that's 30 years ago.
Whatever. 10 years ago in the 90s.
So you had prohibition.
Last week in the 90s.
And I think this is another difference. In Australia, I did some research on prohibition. And interestingly, where I live in Canberra has been the only jurisdiction that's ever had prohibition. And that's when they were building the capital city and they didn't want all the workers to get drunk and be rowdy.
Yeah.
And ironically, the person who was in charge of the Home Affairs person that put in this law in place his name was King O'Malley. He was an American. And there's now a very famous pub, which is an alcohol drinking place, a tavern in the city in Canberra called King O'Malley's. So that's taking the mickey out of the fact there was once prohibition. So we've never had a widespread history in this country of prohibition. And I think that also makes a difference as well.
I believe it does.
Yeah, I can see that. So I would say there are still churches that are strict about alcohol use, denominations or just individual churches within multiple denominations. But I think it's less of an issue, and that is what's making it more acceptable in fiction. That's my thought.
Yes.
All right, so
Yeah.
Narelle jumped ahead a little bit and already mentioned her personal preference when it comes to alcohol and CCR.
When do I ever follow instructions?
That's okay. That's okay. Valerie, do you have personal preference there?
Of course I do. In my Urban Farm Fresh Romance series, I have an Italian family. And as I was thinking about this family with the grandmother and her adult children and her young adult grandchildren, I thought I could make a deal of why this family would never drink. Or I could let them have a glass of wine occasionally and see what happens. Now, you guys who've been watching this for a while, we sometimes talk about how we personally write books, right? And my method is to try and do as much figuring out of my setting and my series and my core characters for a whole series at one time. And then basically they just kind of run loose and do what they want when it's their turn. And so I didn't really think that through completely as I went into this series. And it turned out that one of the grandsons in that family did, in fact, become having a problem with alcohol. So the family kicks in to help, and this wasn't a planned thing from the beginning. I'd like to say that it was all part of the master plan, but it absolutely was not. So it's a very minor part of the series, which is 12 books. So it's a lot of books, but except for the couple of books where that becomes a real issue in his life. So I think there's a place for it to be mentioned casually. And then there's also a place where an author could take that and make it a little bit more pointed. And I have done both, I guess.
So I tend to, like, I don't mind a drink or two on the page or in my own life, if it makes sense. Fancy dinners, special occasions. I don't love characters who need to drink to relax. Because to me, in my personal life, I feel like that is opening the door to a not great relationship with the alcohol. The things, why are you drinking it? If you need it to relax, then you need to do some introspection, in my opinion. So I don't love seeing it in books if that's how they're doing it, unless they're going to then go on and do the introspection with the character, because I also do think I like my books to represent real life. I love the fantasy of the billionaire. I love the happily ever after. I love the fantasy that we get in books too, but I also love the ability for books to address things that we need to be thinking about as believers living in the world. And so since we are talking specifically about Christian romance, these are presumably then written from a Christian worldview, which is not to say, like, don't drink alcohol is not part of a Christian worldview, but don't be controlled by alcohol, because the only thing that should be controlling you is your relationship with Christ and the Holy Spirit speaking in your life.
Absolutely.
Then,
Keep going.
then that's where it becomes something worth exploring. And I love the books that explore that. So if you're going to use alcohol to explore we've seemed to have stepped away from it a little bit, but right when I had my first child, or 2008, there was a big mommy needs wine culture, which seems to have faded a little bit, but I would love books that explored why that's not great. Like, wine is not the defining characteristic of your relationship with your child. It should not be. And if it is, here again, you need more Jesus. And I get that it's more nuanced than that. I make it sound very cut and dried, and there are factors and all of this kind of thing, but a good book, if it's going to go there, can go there really well. And then I would love that. But if it's just going to be like, oh, my character is a mommy needs wine girl, and it's just seen as, haha, that's funny, we love you and you love Jesus and you just drink a lot, that's going to disappoint me, because to me, that is opening the door for someone who is struggling in their walk or in their relationship with alcohol to say, but this is a Christian character who never had a problem with it. And she was, two huge tumblers of wine in every time she was on the page. And look, she's still fine. She got her happy ending. And this is where we then have this issue with books giving you unrealistic expectations.
Yes.
Because while that might work in fiction, in real life, if you're going through half a bottle of wine between the hours of 3 and 5 just to get through the afternoon, you're going to develop an issue with alcohol.
Well, you have an issue with alcohol if that's what you're doing.
Already.
And I think, I mean, the guidelines are there. I mean, the stats show that 1 in 10 people at least have a problem with alcohol. So if you've got a 12-book series like Valerie's Urban Farm Fresh Romance, she's writing realistically if one of her characters has a problem with alcohol. Because statistically,
and I have 24 characters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have 2 with a problem, because we can't forget Dixie kind of has a problem.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean that's real life.
And I think it would be unrealistic to have a big Italian family that never drank. I mean, I'm sure that there are big Italian families who don't. But you would need to then seed that into their story of why don't they?
Well, you could, or you could just not ever think about it. Like, like I wouldn't normally with my characters, most of my series, there would be no mention of alcohol at all. Yeah. And I don't feel like a need to go, and we're not drinking because blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
Yes, that's called author intrusion.
Yes.
But in terms of casual drinking, so from my position as a reader, is I'm very aware of alcohol addiction and how difficult that is, and really aware of how readers want contemporary Christian romance to be a safe space, somewhere that's like reading the Bible. Reading the Bible is a safe space, and reading Christian nonfiction is a safe space. And we want CCR to also have that same feeling of, I trust the author not to take me somewhere that's going to cause me grief. And if you're an alcoholic and reading someone who's knocking back cocktail after cocktail, drinking lots of wine, then if the author's not doing that for a reason, then I'm ready to throw my Kindle at a wall. But that at the same time, you can also have a setup of a really fancy dinner and wine can be poured, but the author doesn't have to say that she took 10 sips. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to get into the nitty gritty. So you can have a setup where you're in a bar or you're in a pub. I mean, I'm quite happy to go there in a CCR, but I don't need to know the details of how many sips somebody has. And I don't need that to sort of be a micro focus. So it can be part of what's going on in the background of the story. But the person who's reading it that has a problem with alcohol isn't sitting there reading about that glass coming up and going into the mouth. And I really think that really is a defining point for me. And if I see other characters thinking, that's funny, she's the drunk girl, he's the drunk guy, that's really cute, then I just want to throw my Kindle at a wall as well. To me, that's just not what I want to see in a CCR. And I get really disappointed when I see authors do that, really, really disappointed, because that's such a missed opportunity as well. And I think, I think there's a point where we can't, there's always going to be someone we offend. I mean, let's be honest. There's always something we're going to write about that's going to hit a hot button, and it's probably going to be unintentional. For example, if we just talk about T.I. Lowe's book that we recently talked about, Indigo Isle, she wrote a scene about someone being sexually harassed in the exact same way it happened to me. Now, I mean, that's it's bizarre that happened, but these things do happen. But she didn't do that in a way that was to make me feel uncomfortable or whatever. It just happened to be the same situation. But you can pretty much guarantee if you're writing about a character and talking about how they're feeling as that wine goes down their throat, you're going to be triggering somebody. Yeah. And so I think thinking about how you actually write it is actually in some ways more important as to whether or not it exists. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think so. That's a good point. So I kind of skipped ahead this time because my next thought was that CCR does purposefully often include themes, designed to encourage believers to think about their position on things and to help shape your worldview, because any of the media we consume, whether it's CCR or the evening news or the football game, has an effect on your worldview. Media does, and you need to have a strong enough grip on your Christ-based worldview to be able to reject or accept things. And Christian fiction can help you fine-tune that if it's done well. So if that was the intention of the author, to challenge your worldview about alcohol through the pages of their book, what would you want to see, or how would you want them to make that clear?
I'll go first.
I was going to say, or I can go first so we understand the question by how I answered it.
I think, I like to see consequences. So, if you want to go back to definitions, it's the problem alcohol. There's definitions everywhere. Having half a bottle of wine in 2 hours is a problem alcohol situation. I think it's more than 10 drinks a week. There's all the different standards that are out there. And I think if authors are aware of what's considered problem drinking, and if they're going to tackle it, I'd like to see the truth. Like, it's not just all fun, ha ha, she's the cute girl in the corner getting drunk. I want to actually see what's going on. Why is the character feeling like they need to use alcohol as a crutch to get through the day, or what's going on with this very serious addiction they have? And I really like it when authors do tackle issues like addictions. I think that can be so valuable to read. There's so much in terms of how that relates to faith as well. Because the whole 12-step program originally was based upon the first step was admitting that you're powerless over alcohol and that you need a higher power. So, God can work through people's lives despite their addictions, and I really love seeing the beauty coming from the ashes, if that makes sense. And seeing that journey to wholeness, and people taking responsibility as well, because I think that's probably the first step. If someone's got an out of control addiction that they're not addressing, then they're not taking responsibility, and they're also not necessarily a good candidate to be in a contemporary Christian romance either, because they're probably not ready to be close to getting married. So there's also that side of it. So often you'll see side characters are the ones that are struggling, or you're down the track where someone has struggled in the past, and sometimes it's easier to read if it's happened in the past because it's not so in your face. But I would hate to see authors not going there in terms of dealing with addictions and dealing with alcohol because they're afraid of what readers will think. I think that would be very sad. But there's definitely ways it can be done really, really well, where readers will close the book and say, that was an amazing story. I'm so glad the author tackled that issue. I learnt this. I discovered that. I now understand my family member that has an addiction more than I did when I started reading the story. So there's a lot of good things that can come out of tackling it.
Generally speaking, if there's a point to be made that not everybody might agree with, I like to see 2 or more characters being given the opposite sides of the issue and have them discuss it. Have one be defensive, one be moderate, maybe a third one be very against and very vocal and maybe not even very nice, and let them talk about it on the page. Let it play out. Sometimes it can sound like the author is like, oh, this book is going to be about alcohol, and this is what I think about alcohol, so this is what you, dear reader, are going to get. All my barrels in one. But it doesn't have to be that way. And we have talked previously about Jennifer Rodewald's book, Blue Columbine, and it's the only one I'm going to mention by name today. So if we're talking about a full-on alcoholic as hero or heroine, that's a really tough place to go in Christian romance for all the reasons that Narelle just mentioned. Yeah. And this was a very hard story to read, and I don't actually recommend it to just everyone. But if it is a topic you want to see well handled in Christian romance, then I will recommend it to you. It was very hard to be in Andrew's mind as he denied having a problem. It was hard to be in Jamie's mind. They'd been good friends as children, and they would just come back into each other's lives, and they're renewing a friendship. And she's like, but I think he's got a problem. No, he doesn't have a problem. Yeah, he's got a problem. So she's trying to help him. She doesn't realize how big the problem is for quite a long time.
Yeah,
Before she
at least,
realizes
yeah.
she has to step away and let him self-destruct. So one thing about this sort of a story that happens right in the middle of the trenches is the author needs to give it a lot of time. A lot of time has to elapse, because otherwise it's unbelievable. You have a problem with alcohol. Oh, you're right. I should get right on fixing that. Next week, now we're engaged. It's great.
Yeah.
And we now have a very toxic codependent marriage that will be unpacked in a women's fiction book.
So you'll see this clearly in the book description for that book. You'll know what you're getting in for, especially if you follow the advice we have given in other episodes about reading the look inside, the preview on Amazon. But in a secondary character, it's a little bit more fluid, because you can go there a little bit or a lot. But yeah, as an author, I really feel like I need to keep my readers in mind, and I need to keep my own conscience in mind as well as to where I'm going.
Well, and you mentioned both Basil and Dixie in your Urban Farm Fresh series. And the fact that you see their problem developing over the previous books, and it's a nice 14 book, really long series.
12,
so there's 12, sorry.
Almost 14.
2 missing ones. So there's room for them to struggle, crash, recover, and then be at a place where they're healed and available,
hero or heroine.
Yeah, available to be in a relationship without it becoming the codependent story of the week for women's fiction.
Although Dixie,
yeah, I mean, and you know, it's not like you'll never struggle again once you are healed either. That's, you know, and I think you show that too. So yeah, I agree with all of that. It needs to just be handled the way that you would want it handled in your friend group. If you had a friend who was starting to show signs of an issue, or you just are starting to realize that they've been showing signs for a while, you know, there needs to be prayer. There needs to be conversation about what do we do? How do we approach this? And it needs to just be handled the way that you would hope that someone would handle you if they were going to confront you about something that had become ungodly in your life.
Yeah. And alcoholism doesn't look the same with every person. It's like there's so many shades of gray and so many different ways that it can manifest. Some people are very extroverted social drinkers. Other people, they're at home in the closet, hiding away, drinking secretly. Some people can stop drinking cold turkey and never drink again and never be tempted. Other people, every single day, they're tormented for the rest of their life over the thought of alcohol. And I suppose I always come back to the reader, because at the end of the day, we are writing for our readers. And how can we be responsible in the way we write a story so that we don't cause our readers to fall into temptation? I think that's sort of where I sort of land with this, and that's very hard.
Also, on the flip side, you don't want to come across as overly condemnatory to someone who has or has had a problem with any issue, alcohol or whatever you're discussing at the time. You know, there's a balance, because alcoholics are just as forgiven by Jesus as non-alcoholics are. So you know, it's important, I think, to make sure that that's included as well, that, you know, Jesus doesn't look at you and go, oh man, I forgave everybody but the alcoholics. Darn, you know, no, he forgave everybody. And so there's, you know, there's that healing, there is forgiveness. It is not unforgivable. there's nothing that is unforgivable. So, and I think we need to be sure that we convey that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of hit the last question, unless you have final things you want to add, Valerie.
I asked in my reader group recently what their thoughts were on alcohol. I specifically said, not your personal, like whether you drink or not. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for your threshold on seeing it portrayed in a story. Are you somebody who like first drink on the page and you're out, or like whatever, right? So they said most of them said they would notice that first drink. And if it, they go, okay, let's kind of tuck that over on the side here. But if it comes up several times, they want to know why it's important. They don't want it there for window dressing, although somebody did say that it helps to set the scene. Like you said, for a fancy dinner, a celebratory dinner or something, can kind of see that. But if it's an author that they already know and trust, they're far more likely to get way into it, even if they're beginning to wonder why this is in here, because they trust that author to bring it home in some way. So I think that's a lot of it, is that if an author starts their career with a book like that, with alcohol being flowing freely and it not really mattering to the story and whatever, then there's a good percentage of Christian readers who are going to be like, I don't think I'm going to read that author again. But if they already trust that author, I'm sure Jennifer Rodewald, that wasn't her first book, right? I'm sure that her readers came with her there, and she's written other difficult topics as well. So we know that's what we're going to get with her many times. She's not somebody that I'm just going to read just for funsies. She's not rom-com. She's not, but if I want to get deep into a topic, then I know she's got the skills to take me there and take me back out.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think, the Bible talks about not getting drunk. So let's not beat around the bush. There is information that you can read in the Bible that makes it quite clear that being drunk is not okay. And that's something that to bear in mind. I think the issue can be, what do you define as being drunk? So my personal definition would be, if you're not legally allowed to drive a motor vehicle because you're over the limit, then that's probably hitting that territory. And so I think as a reader, if I'm reading a main character and their point of view who's tipsy and probably over the limit, then I will probably pass on the book unless I really, really trust that author. Yeah. And if I'm reading CCR, if I'm reading contemporary fiction, or I'm reading a different genre, that's completely different. But I'm talking purely in CCR if they're there. And the other thing I'd say to authors and publishers is that if you are having characters that are dealing with alcoholism, it's a trigger warning topic. Please put it in the book description for readers. So if a reader is struggling with addictions or struggling with alcoholism, that they know that this book may be something to be wary of, may not be the right book for them right now. It might be the perfect book to read in 5 years, but it may not be the right thing to pick up. And I really appreciate authors that do have lists of difficult topics that they address and trigger warnings, because I think that can be super helpful for readers as well.
Well, and especially like with alcohol too, it's not always even the person who is the alcoholic. If you grew up with an alcoholic, it may be a triggering issue for you, depending as how it's being handled, and that there. So yeah, I agree. It is. If you're addressing it as a topic, it's worth making sure that it's clear from the beginning that that's going to be there, so that you're not just blindsided by it. Because then it just sort of sours the whole experience. And like Valerie said, potentially the author, if you don't have the relationship with this author and the books to overcome it.
Yeah.
Cool.
But you'd never know that though, because you could write, Jennifer Rodewald could have 20 books before Blue Columbine, but an author could pick up Blue Columbine as her first book.
Sure.
So I think, it's more a case of every author or publisher should assume that the book they're picking up is brand new to that reader.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And in this particular case, it's very clear in the book description that you've got a hero with a serious problem.
Yeah.
So, you know, the reader, unless you're just clicking on covers, and don't do that, people. Don't judge a book by its cover, neither good nor bad.
Yeah.
Read at least the description, if not the look inside, although please do read the look inside. I firmly believe you should. Reviews, maybe up to you, but definitely the description and the look inside, and then make your choice.
Yep.
Unless you're a reader that doesn't worry about things and can just read anything, then you can just do what you want and pick by a cover or throw darts.
Do what they want.
That's right. That's right.
Nobody listens to me. The cat doesn't listen to me. My family. You know.
But some readers are quite happy just to pick up a book with no idea what's happening and start reading. I'm not that reader, and I don't understand that, but I know there are readers that are quite happy to do that. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we probably have discussed it enough.
Probably.
Yes.
We would love to know your thoughts. You can leave a comment on the YouTube page. I swear I'm not a grandmother.
It is a page.
Yeah, the YouTube channel. Or on the Facebook page if you want to. So we appreciate you joining us today. Again, let us know your thoughts, what you think. And you can find information about the podcast at inspiromance.com/storychats. And if you are over on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And we will look forward to seeing you again next week. In the meantime, don't forget to fall in love with a good book. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.